Alrighty, hello everybody and welcome to the third part of the three-part series for the wind turbine experiments. Experiment 1, we went over introducing this game object hierarchy and the imparenting and understanding why that's important. Experiment 2 was the introduction to the animation system and to the mechanism, getting the animation set up in Unity and getting the states working. Now here in the third part, what we're going to be covering is actually creating the trigger volume for this, writing the script to allow the player to interact, and then adding in some audio sources to start to give the player some communication and player feedback, right? Understanding when you press the button, something is actually happening. So that's what we're going to be going over in this third video. So definitely a lot more to get done, and we're going to be getting into writing the script. So let's get right to it. So inside of Perforce, I'm just going to go ahead and open up my Unity project. So I've had in the past some issues where if you haven't yet opened a Unity project, it gives you an issue with just double clicking on one of the scenes. But once this project has been loaded and Unity knows that this folder is my project folder, I can double click on the scene and the project will be loading, right? It will load the project. Some of you may be getting this error here, right, or this warning. Your project was last opened in a different version of Unity, right? That may have been that we set up the project template in an older version that now you're just getting this warning, right? Just be aware, older version is unsupported. So you can hit continue and be just fine, but if I'm going to go ahead and quit, and what's actually causing that issue is in the project settings here, there's this project version.txt. So this text file is literally just not getting updated. That's why we're getting that warning. So this is a good practice to check out a file. All right, let's check out the project version.txt. I'm just going to double click on it to open it. It's going to open in Notepad. And right here, you'll see that was what it's complaining about. It was open in 5.5.0 F3, but now I'm running 5.6.0, so these just need to match. So whatever version of Unity you're running, make sure that match, and then hit save. Close it. Now I'm going to submit my change list, right? Very quick and easy. Changing it to 5.6, hit submit, right? Now we see that 2 of 2 version. So now if I go ahead and open up my wind turbine scene once again, Unity is loading and I'm not getting that warning. It's loading up on my other screen. All right, and here we are in the project, right? This is right where we left off from the second experiment. All right, so I'm going to build everything for that I need right in this scene and then load in the hub when I actually need it, right? So let's go back to Perforce before I make any changes, and let's check out what we're going to be working on. So this experiment, I'm going to show off the feature revert unchanged files, right? So because we put everything in this wind turbine experiments folder, everything that I've been working on, right? Remember, everything for the experiments are in this folder minus the scene, right? The scene is in the scenes folder, but everything is in this easy to get to place. I can right click on wind turbine experiments, the folder itself, and check out the folder. Right, you'll see now everything is checked out inside of that folder. Now you may be asking yourself, well, why did he check out that material if he's not changing it, or are we going back and changing all the animations? Maybe, right? Maybe I want to go in and tweak the animations to get them blended just nice. Maybe I want to, add something else to the prefab, like we're adding the script, right? So we're going to be adding other pieces. So I'm going to be working on these files. So they're all in my change list. Let's go ahead and check out the scene as well. Wind turbine scene and meta file. Right, now they're all on my list. So we know revert files, remember what this does. Revert files pulls all of the files out of the change list. Right? It's like taking your shopping cart at the grocery store and putting all the groceries back. Right? Revert unchanged files is only going to leave us with what has been modified. Right? So we put a bunch of things in our list, but we only ended up changing 3 or 4 of them. Right, so revert unchanged is going to pull out everything that's still identical. So this is a very common workflow that I see students using, and they enjoy it, and they like this workflow. And I highly recommend the checkout method rather than just relying on reconcile offline work. So they'll like to check out a group of folders, right? This whole group of files here in a folder, and then work and then revert unchanged files, which you'll see in a bit. So you could, in theory, check out your entire assets folder, right? Work on the files you want, revert unchanged files. You'll be left with just what is different, what you actually changed. But why? Why check out all of that when you can do it in a more organized fashion? Again, thinking about working in a team. All right, so let's go back to Unity now. And the first thing I'm going to do is just create a small little control station. Right, so I would just like to use a little cube here. Right, now for this experiment, this set of experiments, the visuals and what the actual asset looks like, it doesn't matter to me. I just want you to see that you got this working, you got it submitted to Perforce, and you've completed these 3 experiments. For the entryway assignment, the visuals are going to be more important. I'm definitely going to be looking for if you are constructing this in a way that makes sense, and if it could exist in the world as well as is it polished, right? Does it look like it could be inside of a game as a polished piece, which we'll get to in an upcoming lecture. So I'm just going to change this to Control Station. Change the name. Okay, now inside Control Station, I'm going to right-click and create an empty. Okay, this empty is going to be my control trigger. So this is going to be a trigger volume that we're going to check and see if the player is inside of. So on this game object, right, you'll see it's an empty with just the transform. Let's go ahead and add a sphere collider. All right, so in the sphere collider component, you'll see this is trigger checkbox, right? And no matter if you're using a box collider, a sphere collider, a capsule collider, they all have this is trigger functionality. So you can use any shape trigger that you'd like, whatever serves the purpose that you need at the time, but make sure there's just the one. So if I hit this edit collider button here, you'll see I have these small faces, little handles that show up on the intersections of where the sphere is. On a box collider, you'll see the faces show up on each face itself. And as I click and drag, you'll see what I'm actually changing is the center in the X direction right now, and then the radius. So you can do this same thing by just coming into here and adjusting these values, right? If I want to make it bigger, I can just drag it, make the radius a bit larger. If I want to move it in the X, you can just position it just slightly. I recommend moving it this way rather than actually moving the game object. Keep the object in the same location and just adjust the size of the, it's better to change the radius than to scale the actual game object. So get the trigger volume a size that you like. So just a little bit smaller. All right, that looks good. And now definitely make sure you check this is trigger box. This is important. You'll see when we get to our script, we're going to be using some of Unity's functionality. On trigger enter, on trigger stay, and on trigger exit. All right, 3 functions that Unity gives to us to utilize. And if we were telling that this specific collider is a trigger volume, right? So we're no longer going to walk right into this thing. We're going to be able to, or walk and collide with it like an invisible sphere. We're going to walk into it and use it as a trigger. So from here, we're going to create a new script. So in this class, you don't have to write very many scripts, but the ones you do, you're going to learn a lot. Right? You're definitely a lot of new information in this class, and this assignment is definitely just that as well. So let me go ahead and rename this to Control Turbine. All right, and now I like to just double click right on the script and that will open up, but open it up in either Visual Studios or MonoDevelop. I'm not too picky which one you're using, but make sure that you've got that on your computer. I prefer Visual Studios. Whatever one you're using, make sure you have your line numbers turned on, right? You see on the side of the screen there my line numbers. In Visual Studios, to get to that, it's Tools, Options, and then it's a bit buried, but Text Editor, All Languages, Line Numbers, right there. That's where you want to go to get those enabled. That's going to be very helpful for anyone else that's looking at your code. Being able to decipher what line by the numbers is very helpful. All right, so now we're going to write the script, right? And I'm not expecting everyone here to just, I'm going to say, make this work and write a script, go. All right, I know that we're all not there just yet. So what I've provided for you is an image, right? And this image is a script. Let me zoom in so we can see it. Right, this is the script, but you'll see that isn't text that you can just copy and paste like up here. It's an image for a reason, right? And that's so you write this script yourself and you get used to understanding what it is that we're actually doing here. You'll see that this is a very well commented script, so I encourage everyone to also comment their code the same way to make sure you understand what these lines are doing. Because what we're doing here is going to be very powerful for actually building your level. When you understand the physics system in rigid bodies, you understand animations and trigger volumes, you're ready to build your level for scraps, right? So showing this this understanding is going to allow you to build the level you're planning to that you're designing at the same time. So we have the script provided for you. I'm going to go ahead and write it out and explain each part of it in my own words, but I definitely encourage everyone to comment it just like it is in the assignment. So the first thing that we need, right, and when we think about what is the script actually doing, what is the goal of writing the script, is if we go back to Unity, this is what we need, right? We need to get access to this toggle spin, and we want, when the player presses the E key, we want the animation to play, right? And what is playing the animation? This toggle spin. So when the player presses E, what they're going to be doing is toggling this toggle spin from true to false, right? It's going to switch back and forth every time they press E. Right, so we need to get access to this animator component, right, to get this toggle spin. Let's work our way backwards. So we need toggle spin. So toggle spin exists in what? Right, it exists in this animator. Right, if I go ahead and select my pivot, and let me go back to the inspector now, you'll see this toggle spin exists in the animator, right, in this animator controller. Right, now where does this controller exist? On the pivot game object. Right, so the first thing we need to do is get access to this game object. So we're going to start out with a public game object, Turbine pivot. All right. Now, real quickly, I wrote one line of code. I'm going to go ahead and save that. Come back to Unity. Now you'll see now this is on our trigger volume, remember. The script is on the trigger volume, so I'm going to select the trigger. I'm going to move my hierarchy up here. I may not need the animator as much. All right, so there we see I wrote that one line, and because it's public, I've exposed it to the editor, so now it's referencing a game object, right? We're looking for what game object we're talking about. So I'm just going to drop in the pivot, right? So the turbine pivot, that's just a name, right? That doesn't mean that that is the pivot object by just typing that. That's just a name, right? It's an empty bucket that you can put an object to reference later. So the next thing we're going to need is a private animator. I'm going to call this one pivot anim. So what this private animator is going to do, this is going to allow us to set this game object's component, their animator component, equal to another one inside of the script. So then we can start to reference this one, and it's going to be changing both. Right? It's set equal to itself. The third thing we're going to use is a Boolean, right? And the reason why we're using a Boolean is this is a way for us to actually check and see if the player is in the trigger. I'm going to name this toggle, but feel free to name this anything you'd like. Right? All of these names, turbine pivot, pivot anim, and toggle right here, these could be anything. This could be Susie, this could be pineapple, this could be watermelon. These names don't mean anything in terms of the system, right? These are just for us as humans to understand and read. So yes, it makes sense for this to be named turbine pivot rather than pineapple, because if you look at this 6 months from now, you're going to say, what the heck is pineapple? What did I do here? And it's just not going to be easy to understand, right? Either yourself in the future or your teammates in any project you're working on. So that's where these names are coming from. But understand, these don't mean anything. It's just a name we're giving it. So now in the start function, right, this is going to be called every single, this is going to be called right when the level loads, right, or right when this scene is initialized. We're going to take this pivot anim here and set it equal to this game object's animator. Right, to do so, I'm just going to say pivot anim equals turbine pivot dot get component. Right, now we use the less than equal or less than greater than brackets. And then this is a function, so we need parentheses, and then a semicolon. So now inside the brackets, we need to say what type of component we want to get access to. Right? You should understand it's the animator component. If you try and put in anything else, right, I want to get access to the audio source. It's going to give you a big warning saying that the audio source, can't convert an audio source to an animator, right? Those are two different types. So what you need to do instead is have them be the same, right? Animator. All right, so now this pivot anim, this private animator that we just have here, this object is going to equal the turbine pivot's animator component. All right, moving on, we're going to keep this update here. We're going to come back to that in a second. Let's go ahead and write a function for our onTriggerEnter. All right, so void onTriggerEnter. All right, now in the parentheses, I'm going to write collider and then entity. So you need to, when you're using this onTriggerEnter, you need to reference a collider of some type. All right, so this is referring to the object that's actually entering or colliding with the trigger volume. And now again, this entity, this is just a name that I prefer. You can use other, you can use this, you could use Bob. It really doesn't matter. It's just something we're going to reference inside of this function. All right, so this is a function, so we need curly braces. I definitely encourage everyone to keep your code clean and organized. You see how I'm bracketing and indenting my curly braces just to keep everything clean and easy to read. All right, so now inside this trigger, inside this function, we're going to have an if statement. All right, so if entity dot tag, and I'll put two equal signs, so equals player, and then we're going to have some information in here. So what this is referring to, so the entity, this is just the name, right, of the object colliding. If that object's tag is equal to player, execute the rest of this code. All right, so two things we're going to go over. What is a tag and the difference between a single and double equal sign. All right, so on line 16, you'll see I have one equal sign. Pivot anim equals turbine pivot.getComponent. This is an assignment. I'm saying this one equals the one on the other side, right? One equal sign is an assignment. Two equal sign, this is a comparison. So I'm checking to see if this object's tag is player, then do something else. So I'm only just looking and seeing it as a comparison. I'm not setting it equal to player. I'm not assigning it to be player. I'm just checking to see if it is player. So let me go back to Unity now and show you what I'm talking about when we're talking about the tag. So here you're going to see every game object, no matter what you're selecting, has this tag and a layer. Right? We'll get to layers in the future. But tags are basically ways to group or check and use logic on specific objects by a certain type. So player, you'll see that's what we're using. Our character in the hub scene is tagged as player, so this should be working for us. We're going to be checking if the player is in the volume. That way it's only the player that triggers this and not any random object. So right inside here, let's go ahead and for now let's just put a print statement. I'm just going to say the player has entered the volume. All right. All right, and so now we have this if statement. Now what I'm going to do is go ahead and copy this. And I'm going to paste this 2 times. So down here on the very bottom one, I'm going to change enter to exit. And all I'm going to do in this print statement is say the player has left the volume. And then in the middle one, this is going to be our onTrigger stay. The player is in the volume. All right, let's go ahead and save that. Let's come back to Unity. And now we're going to test this. So I'm going to grab the hub scene and drag it. And I like to make sure that the hub scene is the top in the hierarchy. Sometimes you'll have weird problems if the the one with the scene with the main camera, which if you look at the character, he has a escort camera in here. There's an object. You don't need to mess with this stuff, but you'll see there's an object tagged as main camera. Usually that scene, whatever scene that is, should be always the first in your hierarchy, so you don't have any sorting issues with the geometry. Right, so if you have that, make sure your hub is at the top of the list. Not a big deal, but you might see some visual bugs if that's not the case. So now we're going to test this. Right, so I'm just going to go ahead and play, and now I'm just looking at the console. Right, that's what I'm testing, is making sure our trigger is working. Right, so I should be able to walk up to my volume. When I get close, it tells me the player has entered the volume, and now you'll see that the player is in the volume, and this is constantly ticking up. Right, and now when I leave, it says the player has left. Right, so I know my trigger is working. It's recognizing the player. One thing you should notice now by these numbers is how these functions work. Right, enter and exit, they happen one frame. Right, so I enter the volume, and that on trigger enter happens once, and that's it. Right, it can't happen again until I leave and then enter again. So on trigger stay, this is constantly running as long as the player is in the volume. So this is running just like an update function. As long as I'm in the volume, it's going to run every frame until I leave. Right, and exit, it runs once. It's the frame I leave the volume is when that function gets called. So in theory, we should be able to put our input in this on-trigger stay. I've noticed some very strange issues with the on-trigger stay and how Unity handles it, to where sometimes there's just a delay to where you'll notice if you put the same code we're building now, instead of in separate function, if you put it in on-trigger stay, there's sometimes just this delay where you press E and the code gets run, but the animation just doesn't trigger. The Boolean doesn't change. We've had this issue for a long time now and haven't quite come to a solution. But you'll see that this is working like an update function. So logically, this is where your code should be able to go. Right? That's how these different functions work. Enter, on-trigger stay, on-trigger enter, on-trigger stay, and on-trigger exit. And make sure that you have these capitalizations correct. If I just have a lowercase t, like on-trigger enter, you'll see now I can save the code, and Unity's like, all right, cool, no errors, no problems. But now if I go ahead and play, right, see clear console, nothing's wrong. Right, I never enter the volume. There's on-trigger stay working fine, and there's exit, but enter is not working. Right, and so Unity thinks, our Visual Studios thinks you're just creating a new function, right? A lower on-trigger enter with lowercase t. So you got to make sure that matches for that to work. A very common mistake that I see. So instead, what we're going to be doing, instead of putting the input inside of this if statement, for reasons that I just explained, we're going to be putting it in update. So we're going to be creating our own function and then calling that function in the update, right? An update is called once per frame. So let's go ahead and start doing that. All right, so below exit, I'm just going to say void toggle, let's call this toggle pivot anim. All right, and this is an actual function. Oops. There we go. Get this all organized properly. All right, so now this function, right, this is what we're going to call in the update. So we'll put that right there. So now you'll see everything. You could, in theory, write this whole function right inside of update, but that makes it very messy and cluttered. So it's better to write the function outside of it and then call it in the update function itself. So now inside of here, we're going to first start with this line, right? If the player is in the volume. No, I apologize. We're going to instead be using that Boolean that we've created, right? We're going to be checking to see if this Boolean is true. So at start, the Boolean is going to be false, right? But now inside of onTrigger enter, let's go ahead and say toggle equals true. So when I enter the volume, toggle will become true. When I leave the volume, toggle will go back to false. Right, so it's going to start out false. When I walk in it, it's true. When I leave, it's false. And then enter again, it's true, right? Back and forth. So now that's how we're going to be using and checking if the player's in the volume. So now down in this function here, we're going to have our if statement. And now the first thing we're going to do is check for if that value of toggle is true. Right, so if toggle equals true, and then we're also going to use check for another condition, right? So using the double ampersand, right? So shift 7, 2 ampersands in C# is and, right? So I can say if toggle equals true and the player presses E, execute the code. The other one, the opposite of that would be or, would be 2 bars. All right, so you could say, you know, if the object is tagged as player or it's tagged as enemy, you know, do this, right? So you can have that functionality there. We're going to be using the and the other thing we're checking for is input, right? So the function for that is just input, and then you can use the dot operator to show 3 different get keys, right? So down here you'll see we have get key down, and get key up. Get key is basically going to be returning as long as the key is held or is pressed. Think of this for like a machine gun rapid fire, right? If you have a weapon that's spawning automatic bullets, if I hold down a button, it's going to continually instantiate bullets, right, as long as it's being held. That'd be in get key. Get key down is for the frame that the user starts pressing it, right? And then get key up is when they let go, right? So let's go ahead and we're going to be using get key up, and then inside there we're going to define the key code, right? You'll see in the function tooltip there is saying a key code and then the key, right? So we're just going to type in key code, right, and then the dot operator again, and now we have access to the whole keyboard basically. And you could also see we have joysticks, so you could set up with controllers, things like that. I'm just going to go ahead and use the standard interact key on PC, and everyone should be doing the same. And then if you want to do your own thing in your other project in Des 3, feel free. But for this class, all your input interaction should just be on the E key. So now if they press E, we're going to execute another if statement. So now inside of here, all right, so now inside of here, we're going to check for now to see what the value of that Boolean is, right? So now we're going to have another if statement. If pivot anim dot get Boolean, so 2 functions for the Boolean itself, get Boolean and set Boolean. Right? Get Boolean is just going to get access to it and check what its value is. Set Boolean, we can actually set the value and change it to be what we want it to be. All right, so get bool, then this is a function, so we need, you'll see there it's looking for a string name. Right, so what's the name of our Boolean we're getting? If you're not sure, let's go back to Unity and look. Right, this toggle spin right here, right, lowercase t, capital S. If you want to make sure you don't misspell it or do anything wrong, you can just copy the text, come back here and paste. Right, so now I know that's exactly what the Boolean is named. And now we're going to see if this equals false. All right, so now if this does equal false, would anyone have a guess as what we need to do? What we need to do is we need to set the toggle spin to true, right? So use pivot anim dot set bool, and now if you hover over this function, it will show you need a string name, comma, the Boolean value. Right, so in the parentheses, we need the string name. I still have it, so paste. Almost pasted perfectly. Just fix that little issue. All right, comma, the value that we want, right, which is true. All right, now let's also just put a little print statement in here so we see this is working. So print, this is just a text that's going to, a string that's going to print to the console. It's going to say the player has activated the wind turbine. So you can keep going and keep copying the code like you see it in the image, but stop yourself and actually go and test this. Make sure it's working to the progress that we've made, right? Because now we have this function down here, right? And this function is going to be called inside of this toggle pivot, right there. Or this is going to be called in the update. So this is going to be running every frame, checking for that input. So I'm going to save. Let's go back to Unity, and I'm going to play. And I'm going to keep this, keep the animator window open so you can actually see that toggle spin value changing when you enter, when you interact. And then if I press E, now you'll see it's turned on, it's spinning. Now in the spinning state, but if I keep pressing E, nothing else happens. Right? We need to set up the opposite condition to go back to the true value, or back to the false value. All right, so going forward, inside of this if statement right here on line 56, go ahead and press enter a few times. Let's go ahead and copy this line, and then I'm going to paste right there. Right, so we have these two if statements right now, right? But what this line is doing, right? So basically, what we want to do is go ahead and change this to be true, and then the opposite down here would be false, right? And that would work just like it is if this wasn't commented out, right? If that was just like that. But you may run into problems with that, and it's definitely not as efficient as you could be. What you can be using here is an else statement, right? Because here it's checking for if it is this value, do this, and then else or otherwise do this, right? Because it will only be one other value. So I'm going to leave that commented out because when I write else, line 65 and line 66, that is the same thing, right? It's the same value, but that's just an easier way to write it as well as more efficient. So if it's true, set it to false, right? And I'm going to say the player has deactivated the wind turbine. Now I'm going to go ahead and save my script, come back to Unity, test it one more time. And if you want to, go ahead and take all that logic just as a test. I encourage everyone, go ahead and take that logic and put it in onTrigger stay. You may see the issue that I'm talking about where there's a delay. With the update, it's going to be immediate, right? Because it's being called every frame. You will never see that stop at all. Right, so now you can see I can turn this on and off. Now that Boolean, we are changing with the player character, right? This player now can interact with that animator. All right, so that's the first step. It should be, by now you should be able to test and make sure everything is working accordingly. You've gotten this far. I'm going to go ahead and save my scene. And let me real quickly show you inside the player character, right, I showed you the camera. This is tagged as main camera. In the player character, this is tagged as player, right? So this is the object tagged as player that's actually allowing this to work. Right, there's the character container. It's made up of 3 pieces: the player character, the camera system, and then the grab null system. All right, so I'm going to save my project and save my scene. And let's go back to Perforce because I like the progress I've made. I'm not done with the experiment, but I don't like to lose the work that I've done, so I want to save my progress along the way. Right? I don't want anything, maybe, Visual Studios crashes and now I have to rewrite the script. I'm going to save it and make sure my work is good. So right now, right, we have all these files in here. Let's go ahead and hit revert unchanged files. Right, so think to yourself before you do this, is there anything else I may have changed? I think I might have changed the prefab. So, just as a quick check, let me go to my prefab and then hit apply, right, because I added the script. Yeah, and it did update. So let me go ahead now and come back to Perforce, and it should catch the prefab as well. So now revert unchanged files. If I go ahead and select this, I'm left with just one. I'm left with just the scene file. So maybe the prefab hasn't been updated just yet, but you'll see that that's the one thing that has been changed. If I go back to the workspace as well, right, in the wind turbine experiments folder, we should have a new script. it looks like it may not be there. All right, and why is that? Right, you may be asking yourself, where did my script go that I wrote? Well, if you look in the assets folder, there it is right there, just dumped in the assets. So that's one thing that Unity can do to you. And remember for the animations, it actually puts it in the folder where we wanted it to go. It popped up the little box, hey, where do you want this to go? With scripts, it doesn't do that. Right? If you go ahead and add a script to an object, I'm just going to call this test. Look where it put that. It's like, I don't know where you want that. I'm just going to dump it in the assets folder. So just be careful of that. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that test. I just wanted to show you where that was being created. Take this control turbine script and drop it in your wind turbine experiments folder. All right, come back to Perforce. Now I should be able to, I'm going to mark this folder for add, and that should catch any new files, which should be the control turbine script right there. And I'm going to submit my changes. So I'm adding the script and updating my scene. So in theory, my prefab should be changed, but I'm definitely going to make sure I get that checked out and submitted for the final when I complete the last one. So let's go ahead and do the same thing again. Right, I'm going to check out the whole folder there, and I can make some other changes to showcase and demonstrate that feature. And I'm going to do the same thing, check out the scene one more time. All right. So last thing we need to do now is just add in some audio to give the players some feedback for what's going on. All right. So let's go ahead and import the package that we're going to need. You'll see at the top of the assignment we say that there is a package provided to you that you're going to need to import. So make sure you have that ready to go. So to do so, I'm just going to right click on my assets, import package, custom package. And now I'm going to navigate to the IND229 content folder. And now inside here is the entryway folder. Right? This is where you saw, here's the turbine experiments and the entryway assignment itself. This turbine audio is a Unity package of just those audio files. So I'm going to go ahead and open that package. You see 3 WAV files. So go ahead and import those. All right, so now you'll see those should import inside of the IND229, this turbine assets. I'm again just going to grab these and stay organized, keep everything in wind turbine experiments. I'm just going to delete this folder. If you want to keep them there, totally fine. You can just mark them for add onto Perforce, but now everything I'm just keeping right in this easy to get to project, or even easy to get to folder. Another really good reason to do something like this is now if, say, this project comes corrupted or you want to move this folder to another project, you can do so and everything will still work as is because all the pieces are right here. All right, so let me go ahead and start to add this audio, right? Unity has a great system for 3D sounds. Oh, and it looks like I broke the script because it got moved. Let me go ahead and just reattach that. Now I need to replug in my game object. So pay attention to that. Oh, never mind. That was the deleted one. So this was the... So Unity does a great job of having 3D sounds. So always think to yourself, what is the object making the sound effect? And can you put the sound on that specific object to utilize the 3D sounds? All right, this turn on and turn off, this is basically, if this was our little control station, if you would interact with it, it would, a button or a lever you'd press, some type of sound effect coming from when you actually interact with the button. So the first sound I'm going to put on the actual trigger volume. All right, this is going to be an audio source. All right, now we need to reference the audio clip, right? What sound we want to play? Well, we want the turn on sound to play. Now at first, I'm just going to hit play and see if I can hear the sound effect. All right, right away the sound plays, that's good. The reason why it's playing right away is this play on awake. Right, we don't want that to happen. That's basically like as soon as the level starts or when this object would be instantiated, it's going to play that sound. We want to control when that actually plays. All right, so I'm going to turn that off, and now let's go back to the script itself. All right, so inside this script, we're going to need a few more pieces. All right, the first thing that we're going to need is an audio source, right? Just like we have this animator here, we need an audio source. So let's say private audio source. Let's call this control audio. All right, now in the start function, just like we found the turbine pivot's animator component, we want to find the control triggers audio source component. All right, so let's say control audio equals get component, open close parentheses, and then in here we need an audio source. So now think to yourself, what is the difference between line 18 and line 20? Right, why do here we have turbine pivot.getComponent and here it's just getComponent audio source? Right, what's the difference? Well, if you think to object-oriented programming, right? What game object has this script? Right, that is the control trigger. So when I'm talking about this object, when I say get component, I'm talking about this specific object, right? Here's the script. So when I say get component audio source, we're talking about this audio source attached to the same object. Here, turbine pivot, this is a component on some other game object, right? The script is on the trigger, the animator is on the pivot object, so they're separate. We want to get access to them in this script. That's the key difference. You could right here write in game object dot get component, right? That's referencing, that's just another way of saying this object get its component, but that's redundant information, so usually it's just removed, right? Because you can just say get component, same thing. Once I understood the difference between those, I felt that my abilities to script and to build interactions increased exponentially when I started to be able to get access to different pieces on different objects. Very helpful. All right, now that we have access to it, we just need to play the sound when we want it to play, right? Now, where do we want the sound to play? And when, right? So we want it to happen when the player presses E and when the interaction turns on, right? So that would be right here. So I'm just going to say control audio dot play. That's simple. And now I'm going to copy that line, and I'm also going to play the sound effect when I turn it off. So make sure that you're putting this below where you actually switch the value. Otherwise, you might be able to hear the sound, and it won't actually animate. So there we go. Now let's go ahead and test it, see if that works. So let's save the script, come back to Unity. And let's test it out. Alright, you hear the sound, it turns on. You hear the sound again, and it turns off. Right, now you should be able to play it over and over again. Alright. And if anyone is wondering how I'm freeing my mouse so easily, just as a refresher, you need to exit, it's tilde. Right, escape brings up the menu here, tilde frees your mouse to allow you to get access. Alright, so we have the first sound in. Now let's go ahead and add another sound effect for the actual wind turbine. So on the pivot object, let's add an audio source. And now here, this audio clip, we're going to add the wind loop sound effect. Let's go ahead and hit play just to hear it. Hear that ambient noise? Hopefully you can hear it over the sound of my laptop fan. But we just have some wind, right, just to aid to that motion. So let's go ahead and turn play on awake off and turn loop on, right? We do want the sound effect to loop as long as as long as the animation's playing, we want the sound effect to be playing. Alright, so now with that in place, while I'm here in the audio source, this is that spatial blending I was talking about. So let me zoom out so you can see that big blue sphere in the distance there. That is the actual blending port. So if I turn on this 3D, right now it's using 3D sound. Before it's just going to be 2D by default, but if you turn it to 3D here, you have this minimum and maximum distance. Alright, so this maximum distance basically is how far away you have to be to hear it. I think that's the minimum we're seeing. So let me just adjust this to 100. There we go. Alright, so now there's the range. That's the maximum distance you can be to hear that sound, right? And you can set a minimum distance as well if you'd like. Alright, so you can really start to customize this and build for an awesome experience, an immersive experience just with sound effects, right? Like if a generator is making a rumbling noise, actually having that sound really like apparent when the player's near it and subtle, more quiet as they're further away makes for a really cool experience. Same thing for collectibles, right? Having your collectibles make a very subtle sound effect can be a way to hint at the player there's something nearby. Right? So play with these values, as well as down here you see this is basically your graph. Right? So as you're way far away, it's very, very quiet, and as you get closer, it starts to become exponentially louder. Right? You can make it linear. You can control this graph any way you'd like to. Not a requirement, but that's there for you to adjust, right? All just attributes in the inspector. So now that we have that in place, go back to the code. And now we're just gonna use our best tool as a scripter is copy and paste. I'm going to copy line 11 where I have the audio source and paste it. I'm just going to switch this to wind audio. Right? And now here, where I'm getting access to the animator, let's copy that line as well. And I'm just going to switch pivot anim to wind audio. And now it's going to give me an error because I have an audio source equal to an animator. So now I'm just going to say audio source. Right? Because the audio source I just put on was on the pivot object. Right? So I can say turbine pivot get component audio source. Now let's go ahead and get those to play when we want it to. So I'm going to copy this line, paste it right below. Now instead of control audio, it should be wind audio. All right, so that's going to play the sound when it turns on. And now instead of playing it again when it turns off, we want to stop it, right? So we're just going to delete play and type stop. Wind audio dot stop. That's going to stop the sound effect. All right, so let's go ahead and save it and test it. All right. That's not the sound effect. That is my mouse you hear. All right, there it is. It dings, it turns on. Not hearing the sound though. Could have been that I was messing with some of these settings. Let me put this back to 2D for now, and then let me put the graph back to 500. Alright, so it's not playing the sound. Okay, so I think I may have had it my minimum distance too small. I put it back to 2D for the blending. It is working. I'm going to mess with that afterwards and figure out a good value for those. All right, so there we have that in place. Let's go back, and now you'll see we have these three sound effects, right? We have this turn off sound effect. So we could go ahead and create another object and have it play a different sound. What we could do instead is on this control trigger, we can go ahead and dynamically change which clip this audio source is referencing. So when we want it to play the turn on sound, we can have it play that. and when we want to turn it off, we can have the turn off sound effect play. So to do so, we're just going to need a few more pieces, right? We just need a few public audio clips to get access to those. So right below the audio components, I'm just going to create two public audio clips. Let's call this one turn on, and then let's copy that line and turn the next one turn off. Alright, so now there are two public, so we're going to assign them inside the inspector. But right here, before we actually play the sound effect, we can assign the clip that we want. Right? To do so, we can just say control audio dot clip equals turn on. I'm going to copy that line. And then right down here, before the sound effect plays, we're going to say control audio dot clip equals turn off. All right, so it's going to switch the clip and then play it right away. All right, we press E, the clip changes, and then it plays. And then the Boolean changes as well. All that's happening in that function. So now I'm going to leave my, now you see the two audio sources. So if I hit play, let's see what actually happens. So no errors yet. Let me pull up my console, because this may be something that happened to you right in the beginning if you didn't assign your pivot object. So now I press E. Oh, not getting any errors. But now you'll see I'm not getting any turn on or turn off sound at all, because it's looking for a clip and nothing is assigned. Right, so you may have been, I was expecting to get a null reference exception. Like for example, if I take out pivot underscore animate me and hit play, now we should get, we're looking for a game object and nothing is assigned. That's what I was expecting, but instead the audio just didn't work at all. All right, so make sure you assign the objects to the script itself. Let me go back. So pivot in the game object, and now for the sound effects, turn on and turn on, turn off and turn off. Again, naming makes it easy for us to assign what we want in the right places. So now, I press E and it interacts, and I press E again, and it plays that turn off sound effect. See, it's slightly different. All right. So that is the completion of the third experiment. So let's go ahead and get all this submitted on Perforce the correct way, right? Let's make sure we get that in there. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and select my prefab and hit apply. Make sure everything is a part of it. So now if I drop my prefab in the world, I should have all the pieces, as well as if we look, so here we have now the audio sources on the wind loop. We have all the pieces ready to actually go for the prefab. You could even, in theory, take your control station and make that a part of the prefab itself, right? If we took control station and put it inside wind turbine prefab, right, that would be a group that we have the trigger volume, all the interaction. We could drop those and have multiple we interact with in the world, right? But that's part of that right there. Let's go ahead and save the scene and the project, and let's go back to Perforce now. All right, so now we have all these files in here. Let's go ahead and one more time do the revert unchanged files, see what we're left with. All right, now we have 3 files, right? We have the script that was changed, the prefab, and the scene. If you wanted to go back and tweak any of your animations, maybe you go back in here into the animator and tweak some of your transitions, or you work on your wind-up, or you adjust any of the spinning, you may see your animator be in that list as well. But you can see that revert unchanged files leaves you with just the files you've updated. So I can submit, and I'm going to say completed wind turbine experiment 03, finished script, and added sound effects. All right, let's go ahead and submit. So what you do from here to turn in the ILA assignment when you're completed with all of this, select your project, right? Select the root of your project and go to the history. Right, and now this should show you basically all of the revisions that you've made. All right, show you that description you've typed in, so I can see completed number 1, completed number 2, completed number 3, as well as the date and time that you completed those, so I can actually show the progression that you made. All right, so what you'll do here is just what you see on my screen is pretty much take a screenshot of it. Right, so I'm just going to, you can use the snipping tool or whatever screenshotting app or device that you like. Just go ahead and make a new one. I just want to see basically that right there. All right, select the project with the screenshot in there, submit that into FSO, and that's the credit for the ILA assignment. If you want to make an executable of this, because that's what you're going to be doing for the entryway, just to get practice, we can go to the build settings. All right, let's go ahead and hit add open scenes. Make sure the wind turbine scene is in that list. We don't need that LD student. So now I have the hub scene and the wind turbine scene. I'm going to hit build. So this isn't a requirement for the assignment, but this is good practice because you're going to be submitting an entry. You're going to be submitting executable for the entryway. So I'm just going to call this last name, first name, wind turbine, and hit build. All right, and that's just a test to see it working in an executable. That way, if you want to share this with anybody or show it off, you have it in an easy to get to or shareable way. So if you have any issues with this, feel free to contact myself, Andrew O'Connor, or whoever your instructor may be for your section. We'll definitely be able to help you out. Be on the lookout for upcoming entryway assignment video where I go over the specifics of the assignment as well as any other information you may need to further your animation skills. Alrighty, my exe finished, so I'm just going to quickly open it up so everyone can see it working in executable. And this is the completed 3-part experiments for the wind turbine. We have it here in executable form. All right, and there we go.